Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast, everyone. February's here, and
Yeah.
the market's catching their breath a little after a hectic year-end.
Yeah.
Everybody's poring over those reports,
Right.
strategizing for the new year, watching inflation like a hawk.
Uh-huh.
But there's one stock that's not hitting that snooze button, Domino's Pizza.
Oh, interesting.
DPZ, it's already up nearly 14% this year.
Wow.
So we got to ask, what's driving this kind of surge? Is this a golden opportunity or just a temporary blip? Let's find out.
Well, to get some insight, maybe we should look at their recent performance. In Q3 2024, they reported a 5% revenue growth, hitting $1.08 billion. And on top of that, domestic same-store sales jumped a solid 3%.
Not bad.
Yeah, those numbers were right in line with what analysts were expecting.
Okay, steady performance, that's good, but is that enough to justify this kind of price jump? What's the secret ingredient here?
I think what's really interesting here is that Domino's, they've really seemed to figure out how to attract those budget-conscious consumers, Yeah. Which is absolutely crucial in this economic climate.
Absolutely.
Their discount programs are really innovative, and I think that plays a big role in their success.
Right. I mean, everybody loves a good pizza deal, especially when you're trying to keep an eye on your budget. But, they're not just thinking short-term. Domino's is playing the long game, too. They've got this impressive streak of 11 straight years of dividend increases.
Absolutely.
Now, that's music to any long-term investor's ears.
Yeah, it definitely shows a strong commitment to giving back to those shareholders. And, it's not just about pepperoni and dividends. They're pretty tech-savvy, too.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more. How's Domino's using tech to stay ahead of the game?
Well, for one, they've been investing a lot in their online ordering platform and that mobile app.
Makes sense?
Making it super convenient for people to order,
Yeah.
Plus, they're looking into some really cool stuff like GPS driver tracking and even using those autonomous delivery robots in some markets.
Whoa. Hold on. Robot pizza delivery. That is some next-level thinking right there. But what's the overall feeling from the analysts? Are they feeling good about DPZ?
Yeah, generally the consensus is positive. You've got an average buy rating from 28 analysts.
Okay.
And they've set a 12-month price target at $501.11.
So potentially we're looking at an upside of over 7%. That's definitely something to keep an eye on. And speaking of keeping an eye on things, their Q4 earnings report is coming out on February 24th. What are we expecting to see there?
Well, analysts are projecting earnings per share of $4.91 and revenues around $1.48 billion for Q4. It's worth pointing out, Domino's actually has a pretty good track record of either meeting or even exceeding those revenue estimates in recent quarters.
Okay, so we've got a lot of positive indicators here. Strong performance tech innovations, analysts are feeling optimistic. But let's be real. It can't all be sunshine and pepperoni. What are some of the potential risks or challenges that investors should be aware of?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's always important to look at both sides of the coin, right? So one thing to think about is that Domino's, with their strong performance and that global brand recognition,
Yeah.
they might be trading at a premium. The current stock price could already be reflecting a lot of that good news. So, valuation is definitely a key factor to consider.
So investors need to temper those expectations. Got it. What else?
Well, the competition in the quick service restaurant pizza sector, it's intense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on pricing and a real focus on value, which could impact Domino's moving forward.
Yeah. It's a real pizza battle out there. Speaking of interesting developments, Citi analyst John Tower just raised DPZ's price target at $520, but he's maintaining a neutral rating. He seems to be pretty interested in that possibility of Domino's maybe partnering with DoorDash and those rumors about stuffed crust pizza making a comeback in 2025.
Those are definitely some interesting developments, but we do have to remember they are still speculative at this stage. We'll have to wait and see how things actually pan out and consider all the different angles.
Okay, so potential partnerships, new menu items, sounds delicious, but we got to stay grounded here.
Yeah.
What about some of the less optimistic news surrounding DPZ?
Well, there is an ongoing investigation by the Grabar Law Office into potential breaches of fiduciary duty by Domino's leadership.
Oh.
This stems from issues faced by their largest master franchisee, DPE, related to, new store openings and closures. This situation could potentially impact the company's long-term guidance for global net store growth.
This is definitely something to keep an eye on, but it is important to remember this investigation is still in progress and the outcome is uncertain.
Exactly.
Speaking of keeping an eye on things, what about institutional investor activity? Anything interesting happening there?
Yeah, there's been some movement. Asset Management, one company, has been increasing their stake in DPZ. And they're not the only ones. Big names like Berkshire Hathaway, International Assets Investment Management, FMR, Champlain Investment Partners, and Vaughan Nelson Investment Management, they've all been adding to their positions.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive list of heavy hitters showing confidence in DPZ. But is everybody on board?
Well, not necessarily. Rumline
Oh.
advisors, for instance, they've actually decreased their position.
So there are some differing opinions out there about DPZ's future. That just adds another layer of intrigue to the story. Now, what about the technical analysis? Can you break that down for us?
Sure, so right now DPZ is trading within a day's range of $470.065 to $485.25 with a volume of 41,953 shares. The stock is down about 1.3% on the day.
Interesting. Okay, so what do the moving averages tell us?
Well, the 50-day SMA sits at $443, and the 200-day SMA is at $456. Both of those are considered to be bullish signals,
Okay.
indicating a positive medium-term trend.
Okay, so the technicals look pretty promising. Are there any red flags we should be watching out for?
Well, we always want to be cautious. The 14-day RSI is currently at 65.90,
Okay,
which is getting pretty close to that overbought territory.
so that's suggesting that we might see some pullbacks coming up.
It's not a guarantee, but it's definitely something to watch.
You mentioned earlier that the trading volume for DPZ was down today, but is there anything significant about that volume in relation to the price?
Yeah, actually, the volume's rising along with the price.
Yeah.
And that's generally a positive sign.
Okay.
It suggests strong buying interest, which kind of confirms this upward movement that we've been seeing.
So even with those overbought signals, the buyers are feeling pretty good about DPZ.
It seems that way.
Now, for those of us who like to keep an eye on those support and resistance levels, where are those lines drawn for DPZ?
Well, support is currently sitting at $470.34. That's our recent support level.
Okay.
And then we've got a stronger support level at $450.80.
And what about resistance? Where should investors be looking for those potential ceilings?
Okay, so we have near-term resistance at $480 and then a psychological resistance level at $485.
Got it. Those are the key levels to watch. What about other technical indicators? What are those telling us?
Well, the MACD is currently showing a bullish crossover, which means that momentum is currently favoring those buyers. But the stochastic oscillator, it's painting a slightly more cautious picture with readings above 80% suggesting those overbought conditions.
So it sounds like we've got a little bit of a tug of war going on here between those bullish signals from the moving averages and the volume.
Yeah.
And then those potential cautionary signs from the RSI and the stochastic oscillator. It could really go either way.
Absolutely. The technicals are giving us those mixed signals, so it's going to be really important to keep monitoring those resistance and support levels to get some clues about DPZ's future price action.
Great points. Now, for those of you joining us for the first time on Investing Talk podcast, welcome. Our goal here is to analyze the investment landscape to help you make those informed decisions.
Absolutely.
And for our loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support.
We really appreciate you tuning in.
And stick around. We're going to dive into the international aspects of Domino's business and discuss what all of this means for you as an investor after a quick word from our sponsors. So before the break, we are really digging into Domino's, their performance here in the U.S. market. But they're not just a domestic player. They're a global brand.
Right.
So let's zoom out a little bit and see how that international presence is shaping their growth story.
Yeah, that's a really important aspect that a lot of people tend to overlook. Domino's has been very aggressively expanding internationally, and it's actually been a major contributor to their overall revenue growth. They've seen a lot of success in those emerging markets like India and China, where you have that rising middle class, and they're starting to develop a taste for pizza.
So even if that U.S. growth starts to slow down, they've got other avenues to explore.
Exactly. It's a very strategic move for diversification and that sustainable growth. But of course, international expansion always comes with its own set of challenges. Navigating those different cultures, the regulations, the economic climates.
Right. It's not as simple as just setting up shop and expecting everyone to love a pepperoni pizza.
No, definitely not. But Domino's seems to have a knack for adapting to those local tastes and preferences.
Like what?
Well, think about those really unique pizza toppings they offer in Japan.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about those squid ink and mayonnaise. I don't know if I'm adventurous enough to try that.
Haha. Yeah, maybe not for everyone, but that willingness to kind of experiment and cater to those local palates has been a big part of their global success.
So international growth is a potential tailwind for DPZ. But what about those headwinds we talked about earlier? The valuation concerns, the competition, the legal issues. How do those all factor into your overall assessment?
It's definitely a mixed bag. On the one hand, you have Domino's as a solid company with a strong brand, very loyal customers, and a history of innovation. They're really well positioned to take advantage of that growing trend of online ordering and delivery. But on the other hand, we can't ignore those challenges. The stock isn't exactly cheap, and the competition is fierce. That legal investigation, even though it's ongoing, it could definitely create some headwinds for them.
Okay, so there's potential, but there's also some risk. So what does this all mean for someone who's maybe considering investing in DPZ?
If I had to give a verdict right now, I'd say DPZ is a hold. I think there's still potential for some upside, especially if they can execute their growth strategy well and navigate those challenges. But I would also caution investors against maybe chasing the stock at its current price. There is some risk baked in there. It might be prudent to wait for a pullback or maybe for a little more clarity on those headwinds before adding to your position.
That sounds like really solid advice. It reminds us that investing is a marathon, not a sprint. Patience and discipline are those key ingredients for success in the market.
Absolutely.
Now let's shift gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about dominoes, but let's zoom out again and talk about the broader market context. We mentioned earlier that February is typically a month of reflection for investors. What are they reflecting on? What are those key factors that are shaping the market right now?
Well, inflation is still a major concern. Those January CPI and PPI reports that we talked about earlier, those are definitely going to move the market. Investors are really looking for any indication that inflation is cooling down, which could give the Fed a little bit of breathing room.
Right, because if inflation stays high, the Fed might just keep raising those interest rates, which could then slow down the economic growth.
Exactly. And then there's also that geopolitical landscape. The conflict in Redacted is creating a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the markets.
It's a stark reminder that those global events can definitely have that ripple effect on our investments.
Oh, absolutely. And let's not forget about those ongoing supply chain disruptions. Those are still impacting businesses globally, contributing to inflation hindering growth.
It's a very complex web of interconnected factors that investors have to navigate.
It is. But even amidst all of this uncertainty, there are always opportunities to be found.
I like that optimistic outlook. So how can investors spot those hidden gems in this kind of challenging environment?
Well, it really all comes down to doing your research and staying informed. Keep up with the latest economic data, pay attention to those industry trends, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
And remember, diversification is key.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Spread your investments across different asset classes, sectors, and geographic regions. That way you're not overly exposed to any single risk.
That is some solid advice. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that's been on my mind lately. We've talked a lot about those financial aspects of investing, the numbers, the analysis. But what about the emotional side of things? How do we stay calm and, level-headed when the market gets a little turbulent?
That's such a crucial question. Investing isn't just about spreadsheets and charts. It's about psychology, too.
Yeah, you're right. Fear and greed can really cloud our judgment.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to have a plan and stick to it. Don't let your emotions drive your investment decisions. Take a long-term perspective and try to avoid panicking when the market dips.
That's much easier said than done sometimes. Any tips for staying grounded when those emotions start to creep in?
Well, one thing that helps me is remembering that the market is cyclical.
Okay.
There will always be ups and downs. It's just part of the game.
Kind of like a roller coaster.
Exactly. And just like on a roller coaster, the best thing to do is just hold on tight and enjoy the ride.
I love that analogy. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from analyzing dominoes to navigating those market twists and turns. Now, before we sign off, I want to remind our listeners that while we strive to provide insightful analysis and perspectives, it's really important to do your own research and consult with a financial advisor before making any investment decisions.
Absolutely. We're just here to provide information and spark your thinking, but ultimately the decisions are yours.
And remember, the information shared on Investing Talk podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice.
Right. We're not financial professionals and we can't offer personalized recommendations.
And with that said, we'll be right back after a quick break to wrap things up with some final thoughts on dominoes and the broader market. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. We've really gone in depth with dominoes, their financials, their tech innovations, global reach, even those potential challenges.
Yeah, a pretty comprehensive look.
So let's put on those investor hats and think about this. If you're looking for a company that has a solid track record, a strong brand, a forward-thinking approach, Domino's seems to check those boxes.
Yeah, they've consistently delivered that strong financial performance and adapted really well to those changing consumer preferences. Plus, they've really embraced technology to improve their operations.
But we can't forget about those headwinds, the stock's valuation.
Right.
That's something to consider, especially in a market that could be pretty sensitive to those interest rate hikes.
Yeah, and that competitive landscape is always changing. They need to stay ahead of the game if they want to keep that market share.
Plus that legal investigation,
Yeah.
even though it's still ongoing, it does add that layer of uncertainty.
Definitely. It's important to really weigh both the positives and the negatives before jumping into any investment decisions.
So let's put it all together. Would you say Domino's is a buy, a hold, or a sell right now?
Based on everything we've talked about, I'd probably stick with my earlier assessment of a hold. I think there's still potential there for growth,
Yeah.
but there's also some risk. So, it might be wise to just wait for a pullback or maybe get a little more clarity on those challenges before really jumping in.
That sounds like a pretty smart approach. Investing's all about balancing risk and reward. Sometimes patience is the best strategy.
I agree completely. Don't let FOMO or fear make those decisions for you. Make informed choices based on your individual circumstances and your risk tolerance.
Great advice. Now, before we wrap up, I want to remind everybody that all the information shared on Investing Talk podcast, it's for educational purposes only. It's not financial advice.
Right, we're not financial professionals, and we always encourage listeners to do their own research, consult with a qualified advisor before making any investment decisions.
That brings us to the end of our look at Domino's Pizza. We hope you found this episode insightful and informative.
Yeah, it's been fun dissecting this company and exploring those broader market trends.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Investing Talk podcast and share it with your friends. We really appreciate the support.
And let us know what you think about Domino's or any other stocks you'd like us to analyze in the comments below. We love hearing from our listeners.
Until next time, happy investing.